to the Dixie. This is a very special morning here. This morning we have Senator Paul and Jamie Comer here. But right now, so we can get going because they're running behind, they've got to be in another town. So at this time, I would like to present to you our Agricultural Commissioner, Jamie Comer.
Well, appreciate everyone coming out this morning. I tell you, the great thing that I've got to experience yesterday and going to experience today is I get to travel with Senator Paul, and he just draws big crowds, I've noticed, all over the state. People believe in Senator Paul. I believe in Senator Paul. If you're on Twitter, you're like, I am, you stand with Fran, and that's a big deal, and appreciate his leadership in Washington. What I've been doing yesterday and we're going to do today is talking about a plan for Eastern Kentucky. I believe with all my heart that we can enhance and revitalize a lot of the rural struggling communities in Eastern Kentucky if we refocus our rural economic development efforts around agriculture and food production. So we yesterday in Knott County, Senator Paul joined me and we presented a plan to grow agriculture and increase food production in Eastern Kentucky. And at the center of that plan was a new branding initiative for Appalachia. And it's the first ever regional brand for the Kentucky Proud program. It's called Appalachia Proud. And what that means, if you see that symbol on a product, that means that product was produced or manufactured in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky by an Eastern Kentucky farm family or an Eastern Kentucky owned small business. I believe that people will pay a premium for a product if they know where it comes from. And people want to support Eastern Kentucky. They know that this part of the state, through no fault of your own, has struggled because of a... I'll just try to yield. All right. They've struggled because of I think, a hostile federal administration that's hostile to not only the coal industry, but to the private sector. So we want to do everything we can to focus on creating jobs and helping family farmers and small businesses, and that's kind of what the Kentucky Proud program is all about. Part of our plan involves Senator Paul's legislation, economic freedom zones. We have to get people to make an investment in communities, and Senator Paul has the perfect legislation in Washington that I think would help all of Eastern Kentucky, the rural struggling communities, by attracting new investors and helping keep more money in Eastern Kentucky, and I'm sure he'll talk about that. We're working with the universities in Eastern Kentucky. We challenged each university to have a special niche project that focuses on developing a new type of agriculture industry outside the box. Obviously in Eastern Kentucky, the further east you go, the less corn and soybeans and traditional agricultural crops you're going to find. But we want to think outside the box. With UPike, the University of Pikeville, they're going to be working on a ginseng project. We all have been ginseng digging probably, and that ginseng ends up in Asia to be processed. I think it should be processed in Eastern Kentucky, and I think we should produce more of it. So that's something UPike's going to work on. Morehead State University is working and doing a lot of research and development on orchards. You know, trees grow well in the mountains. We should have more orchards in Eastern Kentucky. So we're going to work closely, when I say we, the Department of Agriculture, with Morehead State University to see that happens. Eastern Kentucky University is working on a great project involving honeybees. And we think Eastern Kentucky can be the honey capital of the United States. So these are the types of projects that we're working with our universities on. We're going to try to focus on education. We're working with the Appalachian Wildlife Foundation to draw what I think will be a major tourist destination for Eastern Kentucky, a wildlife center that focuses on the great wildlife in Eastern Kentucky, the elk, the deer, and also has trail rides, focuses on nature, tells the positive story of coal and what Eastern Kentucky does for our nation's energy policy. There's a project similar to this in Pennsylvania that drew 350,000 visitors last year. So these are some of the things that we announced yesterday that we're working on at the Department of Agriculture. I'm so honored to have Senator Paul here, because anytime you want to get a message out, not only does he draw bigger crowds, he draws a whole lot more media than the Commissioner of Agriculture draws. when we made our announcement in Knott County, and I saw the CNN crew come in, I'm like, that's a good sign that this is going to get out. But I'm proud of Senator Paul and what he does. He could be traveling the United States right now. I think we all know that he's the front runner for the Republican nomination for the presidency, and he could be anywhere in the United States, but he wants to be in Eastern Kentucky with the people that he represents, listening to your ideas and concerns, because that's the type of person he is, and that's why we're going to see this guy on a bigger stage very soon. Please join me in welcoming our junior U.S. Senator, Senator Rand Paul.
Anybody here ever been on Lake Cumberland? All right. Anybody ever seen the dusky-tailed darter when you were out there? Have y'all heard this story? I've just been amazed and sort of, when people say your government hasn't grown too big, they need to listen to this story, okay? They found this dusky-tailed darter, which is either a minnow or a perch or something. And apparently they found it like 20 years ago, and it's been in the tributaries going into Lake Cumberland. We repaired the dam, and the water's been down 50 feet. They've gradually been working the water up. So the water, they have now gotten to like 700 or something, and they're going to stop there. Apparently, normal boating and everything occurs a lot better at 720. You can actually tie your boat to a tree. But they're not going to fill it up because they found a fish, and they're afraid the water might hurt the fish. It's like, do you hear what you're saying? More water is going to hurt a fish. So we had a meeting last week. Senator McConnell and I sat down with the head of Fish and Wildlife, and we had this discussion. And he was like, well, we're going to study the issue. And I told him, frankly, I don't think you have the knowledge, or anybody has the knowledge to know the answer. For example, last year it rained a bunch, and I was on Lake Cumberland, and the lake was at 740 feet, just from rain. It was pretty high last year. And this year now it's down again, and they were finishing the repairs. And they found more of the fish. So I said, you could argue the fish like water. They went up to 740 feet and you have more. The other thing is, 20 years ago they found one tributary with this dusky-tailed darter fish. Now they have 6 tributaries. But they're more worried. I said, you should be less worried. You're finding more of the fish. But they're studying this. It'll take hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for the study. It'll go through and they'll probably eventually raise the water. But do we lose another season for the marinas and the sporting and all the stuff that goes on in the lake? This is what's going on with your government. No one's using any common sense, but someone says, oh, we got to get the study. We were in western Kentucky over by Kentucky Lake in a little town over there. When it rained, their sewage plant was so old that the raw sewage would go into the lake. So they wanted to build a bigger sewage plant. Makes sense. The government said, oh, no, you have to have an environmental impact study. This is the federal government. And then you have to count the mussels, the pocketbook mussel you have to count in Kentucky Lake. And we're like, why? Do you think sewage has anything to do with their existence? And do you think if they like sewage, we should just continue to dump sewage into the lake? Nobody wants that. We need a bigger sewage plant. Everybody knew they were going to build one, but it cost them a couple $100,000 to get somebody to come out there and count the mussel backs, the pocketbook mussels, and then make a guess whether it was better or worse to have more or less sewage in there. Just ridiculous stuff like that, but we do it all the time. If you talk to anybody in the coal industry, it's the same kind of thing over and over again, regulation after regulation. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have any regulations. I mean, there really is. I mean, you talk to people, as you move out into coal country, nobody out there wants dirty water. Nobody wants dirty air. They live there. You think they of all people would not be conscious of this? But they also want jobs. We're going from here over to Harlan, and some estimates have had Harlan's unemployment at 17%. We were in Perry County, and they were saying there may be 1,000 miners out there that are out of work. So really, they are suffering. Miners that's a good job. Those were people who ate in restaurants and bought their goods from the local dealers. They're suffering out there, but it's because there's a lack of balance. The president's always saying, he's poll tested the word balance, and he's saying, we need a balanced solution. Sounds good, but really it's just not true. There is no balance. He has gone overboard in everything, and he has said he was going to bankrupt coal, and that's what's happening. People are losing their jobs, and it's a devastating occurrence throughout eastern Kentucky. We have fought tooth and nail against what he's doing, but we don't have enough votes. We are in control in the House, but not in the Senate, and then he controls the veto. So we haven't been able to stop him to the large part. I think we also, in addition, though, to trying to stop him, we need to have a positive message. There's been poverty in eastern Kentucky even before the war on coal. So the war on coal has made it a lot worse, but there's been generation, two generation, decade after decade poverty. So what I've said is we have to rethink the problem of poverty. We've sent grants. It's not like money hasn't gone to Appalachia. There's been Appalachian grants that have been sent for decade after decade to the tune of billions, if not trillions of dollars. But here's why I don't think grants work as well. And I'll give you the example of the Dixie Cafe. If I were to come to Corbin and say, well, Mr. Smith would be good, and we'll give him $100,000 to start Dixie Cafe. The chances that I pick the wrong person, 9 out of 10. Restaurant business is tough. The fact that they've lasted 2 years is great, but nobody knows. They struggle and they work and their family's here. It's not easy to run a restaurant. 9 out of 10 fail. So if you let government decide who should own restaurants, send your money to Washington and let Washington come back to Corbin and say, Mr. Smith should start this restaurant, you'll be wrong 9 out of 10 times. So government grants don't work to create jobs because most time government doesn't know who to give the money to. If you want to think of one of the worst examples in recent history, think of Solyndra. We gave $500 million to one of the richest men in the country to sell solar panels, but it turned out nobody wanted his solar panels and you lost all your money. The difference is Dixie Cafe will survive if you support it. Consumers vote every day. The purest of all democracies is the marketplace. And so every day you will vote, whether you eat here, whether you eat someplace else, whether you shop at Walmart or you shop at Kmart or you shop at Kroger, you're making those decisions. So the type of plan we're talking about is economic freedom zones. It's not a grant. I don't choose which restaurant owner to give it to, but if they're successful, they're paying taxes. So if they live in one of the areas that where we're promoting these economic development zones, their taxes would go down, not just a little dramatically. What does that mean? They can expand their restaurant, they'll stay in business longer, maybe they hire an extra person to work in the restaurant. Who knows, maybe they make enough money they go buy a Mercedes from the Mercedes dealer. So I mean the thing is that we're all interconnected, but it makes a difference how you give money back to people. If you take it from them and then choose somebody else to give it to and say, oh, that person will create jobs, it almost never works because you don't know who to choose. But if a business succeeds and you're voting for them by eating in their restaurant or buying stuff from them, we give them lower taxes. So economic freedom zones, if it were to pass, would lower the corporate income tax to 5%, the personal income tax to 5%, the payroll tax for the employer and for the employee 2 points, and the capital gains tax to 0. This would be in areas that have significant unemployment or difficulty with growth. I think Laurel doesn't qualify, but I think Knox and Whitley would qualify into this. And over the next 10 years, it would leave about $10 million in Knox County and $10 million in Whitley County. But it wouldn't be me passing out the money. It would be left in the hands of those who earned it and who paid the taxes. They just pay less taxes. The other thing about this type of plan is that it is more politically acceptable to people. Think about it. If I go to Bowling Green and say, hey, I'm going to raise your taxes and send it to Appalachia, they're not too happy. If I go to Houston and tell them I'm going to raise their taxes and send it to Appalachia, they're not too happy. They say, haven't we already done that? But if I go to Houston or Bowling Green or Louisville and say, these people are struggling, the coal industry is dying because of the government, there's significant unemployment, do you mind if I lower their taxes more than yours? I think it can be acceptable. It's still not a perfectly fair system, but when you have 18% unemployment, I think it's better than giving you a government grant, just give you back more of the money that you earned. It also goes to the people who create the jobs. So we've introduced this. It's co-sponsored with Senator McConnell. We're trying to get a vote on it, but we have a guy that's standing in the way. His name's Harry Reid. So if y'all could help us, send Harry Reid back to Nevada, then we might have a chance of getting a vote on this. But it is a good proposal, and I think as Republicans, we have to figure out a way to broaden the base of who we're trying to attract to our party and let everybody know that we are not the party of just the rich. We're not the party of just business people, businessmen and women. We are a party who is concerned with those who are unemployed. We're a party that is concerned with poverty, and that no one political party has a monopoly on this. And it's not that I'm saying Democrats don't care, but some people try to portray that Republicans don't care. I think both parties care We just have different proposals for how we would fix the problem. And I think there's significant objective evidence to show you that what we've been trying hasn't worked. You know, we've been trying the government grant, the Appalachian grants for decades, and it just isn't working. We are approaching a time in our country, though, where we're going to have to make some serious decisions. We're borrowing about $1 million every minute. And there are repercussions to this. The burden of that debt, some economists say, is costing us 1 million jobs a year. So when people say, oh, that debt's going to be handed down to our kids and our grandkids, that's right. But I think it's even more imminent than that. I think we're suffering from the burdens of it now. There's a lot of things that also could be repaired in our country. So I'll often tell people, if you want a bridge in northern Kentucky or you want a bridge in Louisville, you got to tell me that maybe we need to make that a priority over building a bridge in Pakistan. It is a matter of making priorities. We don't have enough money to borrow money from China and then send it to Pakistan and build bridges and roads in Pakistan. And it also many times just isn't buying us friends around the world. You think of all the unrest that's gone on in Egypt, and you look at these Egyptian protesters by the hundreds of thousands, and when they see the tear gas being rained on them, and they look down and they see the empty shell of tear gas, and it says made in America, it doesn't give them a warm, fuzzy feeling for America. So many people think our foreign aid is buying friendship around the world, but often our foreign aid is buying weapons that autocratic leaders around there use to suppress the crowd. So it's buying friendship with governments, but it's not necessarily buying friendship with people around the world. So we do have to have a different direction. We have to think about our priorities. And I think as we move forward, though, in order for us to win with our ideas, we have to show that our ideas can reach a broad cross-section of people. I think if we do, I think if we proclaim our message with optimism and with the empathy that's required for those who, I don't call them the have-nots, those who are the not-yet-haves, that we are for a system that allows all people to achieve, I think our message will resonate and we'll become the dominant leaders in ideas again. Thank you very much for coming out. We got time for a couple questions if anybody has any questions. As long as they're easy questions.
What can we do about Obama's using the executive privilege?
That's a good question. One of the biggest problems over not just this administration, but I think over 100 years, has been the gradual transfer of power from Congress to the presidency. And when our founding fathers started our country, they were big on the separation of powers. Montesquieu was one of the philosophers that our founding fathers read, and he wrote that when the executive tries to become the legislative branch, when the executive begins writing laws, that's the very definition of the beginning of tyranny. And I do believe that. And I try to make it a little more bipartisan in the sense that Obama's really escalated it, but it happened under Republican presidents also. There's been a lot of power shifted to the executive. The problem is that you don't have as much check and balance. The checks and balance were, if you don't like what I'm doing through legislation, you can vote against me. You don't like what your congressman is, but your president really is once every 4 years, and you're not getting a chance to change out the presidency. And there really isn't the debate. And the president will say, well, it's so hard to get things through Congress. And it's like, welcome to democracy, Mr. President. You're supposed to debate and convince people. But like with Obamacare, he's amended Obamacare probably 15 times without any congressional approval. That's illegal and unconstitutional. And it's something that we need to be very concerned with. And there are some lawsuits progressing. It's hard to get standing for these lawsuits. But I think there's a reasonable chance that some of those lawsuits will make it all the way to the Supreme Court. Yes?
Are you stand on the Second Amendment?
I'm for all of them. I'm for the whole Bill of Rights, but yes, definitely the Second Amendment, and it's something that's been very emotional in the last year or two, but I've tried to stop increasing federal control in any way that would usurp the Second Amendment.
I would appreciate you continuing to do so.
We will. In addition to the Second Amendment, I often tell people who want to protect the Second Amendment, we have to protect the whole Bill of Rights, though, because if you don't have the Fourth Amendment, which is preventing the government from coming in your house, your Second Amendment will be quickly gone if they can come in your house without a warrant. And this is an important thing, and we're actually discussing and fighting this right now with the NSA, is that there is a question of whether or not your records are yours or whether you give up all agreement to privacy when you give them to someone else. I personally think when I put my money in the bank, or I put my money, use a Visa card, or I use the phone company, there is a privacy agreement. I thought I was making an agreement that they would keep my information private, and that the only reason the government would look at it is if they had a warrant saying there's probable cause that me, not all Americans, but one individual with a name we think is a criminal. And I don't have a problem with that. The government can look at your records then, but they go to a judge first. Right now, we're collecting all phone records from all Americans. Now, some of you might say, well, phone records, that's not that big a deal. You can't tell that much about people to it. It's getting to where you can, though. You can tell your travels, where you've been all day. They say they're not collecting that. There's still some question. But I like to talk about it in terms of another record that you give to people. And one that you give to people that's disturbing to me if the government had it is my Visa bill. Think about it, that's a third-party record. They say, oh, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the Visa company. Well, I kind of have a privacy agreement with most of these companies. They're not supposed to share it. They can share it for shopping and things like this, but they're not supposed to go to you and say, hey, do you know what he's buying? Think about what could be on your Visa bill potentially, though. Whether you smoke, whether you drink, whether you gamble, what magazines or books you read, do you see a psychiatrist? Do you take medications? Conceivably, if you use your Visa card for a lot of stuff, your whole life could be presented to people on Visa. And once again, if they accuse you of a crime and a judge says a warrant, that's fine. But really disturbs me to think that they could be collecting all of these records and saying, and if you watch and read the government officials' responses, most time when they respond, they'll say, well, we do have privacy controls and this, but by the way, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply. And this is why it's a big question. We've decided to go take the president to court over this because some previous cases have actually indicated maybe your records aren't protected. I think that if those rulings are such, I think they were wrongly decided and need to be modified. They were also from a period in time when most of your life wasn't online. In 1975, there wasn't that much information about you through all your records. Now, if you get access to people's records, you know almost everything they do in their life. And really, I think we do have an expectation of privacy that should be protected unless there's probable cause of a crime. One more, and then I think we're going to go.
What about the Senate rules? The Republicans take over, will the nuclear option?
I think the question is referring to the rules over the filibuster and the nuclear option. It typically was that any senator could filibuster over a nomination or almost anything. And people say, on one side, they say, well, that's obstructionist and it leads to impasse and gridlock. Actually, I think it's sometimes the opposite. I'll give you an example. For 3 years, I've been trying to get a vote on audit the Fed. I just want that to come to light. I want the Federal Reserve to reveal what they're doing. And also I want to know, are there people profiting financially from their dealings with the Federal Reserve that we don't know about? Some of this money circulates in Wall Street very quickly from the Federal Reserve, and it goes back and forth, and the buying of the bonds back and forth. Somebody's making money off of government. It's not your local bank, but somebody in New York may be making money off of the transactions of government. So I want a vote on audit the Fed. In the old days, what I would do is I'd hold up some nomination, and then I'd trade back getting rid of letting the nomination go forward for a vote on something I wanted. So really it led to compromise. Now, since the Democrats have enforced this nuclear option, there's no more filibuster, I can't hold up the Fed chairman anymore. They just roll over me. But as a consequence, they don't have to talk to me. So really, the filibuster is the opposite of obstructionism. The filibuster is, let's say you and I are in opposite parties, you'll come talk to me because I now have leverage over making you talk to me. But then you reach a resolution for the most part. Most people aren't so petty that they just say, like while I object to Janet Yellen and I voted no, I'm happy to eventually vote on it, but I'd love to be able to use that as a tool to get a vote for something the Democrats don't want to vote on. So really there'll be less votes. In the last 6 months, there have been 4 Republican amendments to bills. The Senate was famous for unlimited debate and unlimited amendments. You don't even have to have germane amendments, supposedly. But in the last 6 months, we've had 4 Republican amendments because the filibuster's gone. Harry Reid does whatever he wants. And so really it's become a very tight-fisted rule by one individual. He even kind of controls his own caucus, which would like to have more amendments. And so there's very little debate, and the Senate's become more like the House now. I don't know what the Republicans will do. It's when when people feel injured, they sometimes feel like they want to get back at the opposite side. I do know that what Senator McConnell says is he will be for more open debate and more amendment process if he were the leader. Thanks, everybody.